to me, the guy I want and I think they should want is Devontae Smith at number 12. Will he make it there? I don't know. But this to me is like Justin Jefferson. Not to say they're going to have the same amount of success, but and not that they're the same exact player, but when you're looking at a guy you can bet on to be a good pro, I just think everything about Devontae Smith, weight concerns aside, which aren't a concern to me when you look at how he's been durable, how he's been able to produce an elite level college football, I think he should be the guy, and I think it's a decent bet that he could be the guy.
Have been pretty harsh in our questioning of the Eagles today. Our next guest is going to come on. He's going to be Mr. Positivity. I'm guaranteeing you that. Well, maybe not. We'll see what he's got coming for us. If you don't read him at bleedinggreennation.com, you're missing out, Eagles fans. Brendan Lee Gowton from Bleeding Green joins us here on Birds 365. BLG, how are you this morning?
Jody, John, glad to be here. Jody, I'm usually talking to you at midnight, so it's nice to be talking to you during the day.
Yeah, the sun is way too bright for you and I to be having a conversation, but somehow we'll get through it. All right, your take. We had Shil Kapati on in hour number one. Want to get another guy who lives, sleeps, eats, breathes birds day in and day out. I know that you are around the team all the time and certainly have a good grasp on what is going on with the Eagles. What that was revealed in the article yesterday said to you, wow, it's even worse than I had believed it was?
I don't think that it is. I think this is basically why I've been feeling so like down and skeptical and really kind of just checked out in some ways on this team. It's just like it feels like caring about some of the smaller things right now in terms of who they're going to draft or things like that. Like don't matter if the big picture items aren't in place. And when I guess the biggest takeaway, like the macro level thing here is when you have an owner who doesn't really trust the people he's hired in place, well, then that's pretty, and doesn't allow them to do what they're hired to do. Well, that's pretty concerning.
Well, that to me, BLG, and I agree with you, the lack of transparency when I look at this organization, and by that I mean at the top, and Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman, and I kind of say Nick Sirianni should get used to this because he's going to be thrown out there with no life raft to explain these types of decisions. The name Alec Halaby, you know it, I know it. I don't think a lot of fans know it, and how important he is to this organization. And that's the kind of transparency I'm talking about. Is that sort of the crux of the problems with the way the Eagles do business?
Yeah, I think the lines of power are blurred. I think that's something I've talked about with Jody a lot. Just like you have people in this organization, let's just say Carson Wentz, who I think had more power than they really should. And it's not just him. The Athletic article also talked about how, Howie Roseman plays favorites and Fletcher Cox has a lot of influence too. I remember last year when the Eagles were potentially in the mix for trading for DeAndre Hopkins, there was talk that, well, they can't really do that because then they're going to potentially have to redo Fletcher Cox's deal if they tear up DeAndre Hopkins' deal. So I think there's like there's a lot of like people pleasing. There's a lot of blurred lines again when it comes to who's in charge. And it doesn't seem like there's a clear power structure always, or like there's different influences that get involved. It doesn't seem like there's a process that remains consistent when you look at something like the J.J. Arcega-Whiteside draft pick, and when you're hearing that like the owner is making that pick.
Yeah.
So like it just seems like the process is kind of messy.
Did, after reading this piece and since the season has ended, BLG, has your opinion changed on Doug Peterson? I was okay with him being fired. I thought he had a lousy year. I thought there was a chance to sweep clean an organization. They surely didn't do that, but they moved the coach out. After reading some details in this article and finding out what Doug Peterson had to deal with on a week-in, week-out basis, even after winning a Super Bowl, it made me think, maybe Doug did get more of a raw deal than I thought. But it also made me think, well, maybe Doug wanted out more than we knew. Has your opinion changed on Doug Peterson no longer being the head coach of the Eagles since shortly after he was given his walking papers?
No change for me. I think we're seeing this is like this story reveals the light that like this is why Doug Peterson looked so like beaten down and tired last year. Like this is a guy who had to deal with a lot of BS, and I think especially given the success that he had. So. And it honestly, it seems like a miracle that Doug Peterson made it as far as he did, because they thought about replacing him. After his first season here, there was talk of that, like, all right, if you don't do what I want in terms of the Mike Groh decision and everything, that Doug could be gone. So it's really a miracle he made it this far, and I think it shows you why Doug Peterson went to Jeffrey Lurie with those staff changes that weren't really inspiring to a lot of people, but he was basically saying like, look. If I'm going to be back, we're doing it my way. And then if not, then I don't want to be back at all. And good for him, because he stood up for himself and he wasn't going to compromise.
Yeah, Brandon, with those staff changes, as you mentioned, and I think that was really the tipping point of Doug not coming back, and whether it was elevating Press Taylor or Matt Burke to be the coordinators. You're right. It's not awe-inspiring, certainly from the fan base's perspective, but put on your Jeffrey Lurie hat instead of the Sealski hating Wawa hat. But if you went through this with Mike Groh and Carson Walsh, Doug wanted to keep him. He was forced to fire him. Now, fans didn't like those guys either. But you win the Super Bowl. Shouldn't you have the autonomy to at least the benefit of the doubt to say, these are my guys? Look, if they fail, great. But I think we see with hindsight, Mike Groh wasn't the problem with this offense. Fans may not like him, but it didn't get better. So how do you keep going back to the same well as Jeffrey Lurie and saying, I know who should the assistant coaches be? Where does that come from?
Yeah, that's the part of the problem, right? Is like it's not Jeffrey Lurie hiring Doug Peterson and then trusting Doug Peterson to build his own staff. Now, I think there are discussions that should be made. If it's truly collaborative, which it should be, but doesn't actually seem to be, then obviously Doug has to make a case. And if the owner is saying like, well, look, you're really not providing me the evidence to keep him, then there's discussions to be made, maybe on a case by case basis with certain people. But it seems like the general guiding principle is like the owner just gets his way no matter what. And there was a Carson Wentz factor in there too, and I think when it came to Mike Groh, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of like there's a lot of people to please, and different people are pushing for things and have different power. So it's all politics in that terms, and just like of who getting what they want, all these agendas. But when it comes down to it, the bottom line is like I don't think it's a great environment when the owner is meddling this much.
BLG, we're just over 2 weeks away from the NFL draft, and I got a question or two for you on the draft. But before we go there, after the coaching staff was filled out, we knew this offseason was not going to be an overly active one for the Eagles. Very little wiggle room and cap room to make major adds via free agency. They have picked up a couple of guys, some of which may be in the starting defensive lineup this upcoming year. Understanding he was kind of handicapped and viewing it through that light, Howie Roseman done an okay job at reloading so far this offseason before we get to the very important upcoming draft?
It's such like a interesting question to answer, because how can you not include the context of like the Eagles 2021 salary cap? Like almost a quarter of it, assuming Zach Ertz does get traded, is going to be in dead money. So, and the fact that they weren't able to spend more is because the cap has been poorly managed to an extent. Now, obviously, COVID didn't help them either, but still, I mean, there's a lot of bad contracts on this roster. So, if you're grading it on the curve of they've made all these mistakes and now this is only what they can do moving forward, yeah, I think it's been fine. I don't think it's been amazing because, you get Anthony Harris on a 1-year deal. You get Eric Wilson on a 1-year deal. Okay, there's flexibility there if they don't work out. But, I mean, there isn't the security that if they do, that you're going to have them. These aren't necessarily guaranteed to be long-term pieces, and we're all not really expecting the Eagles to be seriously competing this year, so they can't only be thinking about this season. So I think he's done fine for making the most of what he's had, But the problem is he's only had so much to work with because of the previous mistakes.
Context is always important, Brandon. You bring it up. Yeah, I'm with you. I think he's done a great job with the issues that are in place, but he put those issues in place.
He caused those issues.
Yeah. So it's difficult to say, hey, great job after you've done it. But I do think there's value in the Eric Wilson and Anthony Harris signings. But look, this season's about Jalen Hurts and figuring out what you have in Jalen Hurts. I look at what the Eagles are doing, not what they're saying, because you had the ESPN report with Chris Mortensen saying, Jeffrey Lurie said, build around Jalen Hurts. But you hear all these whispers, and they're keeping an eye on Deshaun Watson and that situation in Houston. Russell Wilson, I always said it's been the white whale for this organization. And they have potentially 3 first-round picks to do whatever they need to do if, say, Sam Howell develops, or the kid from USC, or Spencer Rattler in Oklahoma, the next flavor of the month. Do you think there's a concrete belief in Jalen Hurts, or it's like he's the stasis, he's the bridge, and let's get to 2022 and get our quarterback?
I would say that it's not unanimous. I would say, what's one thing that story reveals, one of the many things from The Athletic, is I think there often aren't unanimous opinions in that building, and it kind of depends, who is able to put their thumb on the scale more, and ultimately, when it comes down to the owner, that's what matters most when he's wielding that power and not trusting people to do their job. So I think Jalen Hurts is absolutely going to get a shot here. I think the good thing about the Eagles trading down from 6 to 12 is it gives them a phrase that Sam Hinkie used to use, optionality, in terms of, I don't think they have a concrete plan at quarterback. I think it's kind of like wait and see. Does Deshaun Watson become available somehow? I don't know about that, but that's an option. Like you said, Russell Wilson. I think they have a lot of different avenues, and I think that's what that trade was about, is giving them different options in case Jalen Hurts doesn't work out. But I think there's a scenario where he does play well this year, and they feel like he is their guy. And then instead of using those picks to trade for or draft a quarterback, then they use those picks to kind of build around him and give him some more pieces to work with.
And, oh, by the way, I know it's way in advance. I don't know that there's going to be a franchise quarterback in next year's draft, but that's getting way down the line and putting the cart before the horse. This year's draft, before we get to next year, and the next draft quarterback the Eagles are going to take, Johnny Mack has a specific theory about the Eagles in the draft this year, that when given a chance, top half of the first round, they like to stay inside, trenches, between the tackles, linebackers. They don't
Not linebackers.
Right. They don't ever take linebackers, but they would be inside the tackle type guys, as compared to either sprinted out, tight ends, wide receivers, and or on the outside, those who have to cover those guys, quarterbacks and the like. The Eagles' history says they go trenches. They go inside. They don't go outside when they have high first-round picks. I think it's about 90-10 that they're going outside here with either a tight end, a wide receiver, and the tight end is going to be Pitts. So once he's off the board, that's not really a play. So it'll be a wide receiver and or a cornerback. Are they going inside or outside with their first-round pick in your guesstimation?
It's really hard for me to shake the idea that they're not going to take a lineman when Howie Roseman, for 7 out of his 9 first-round picks, have been offensive or defensive linemen. And then obviously the 2 exceptions are a quarterback that he traded up for, Carson Wentz, and then Jalen Reagor last year. Is he really going to go wide receiver back-to-back? I feel like that's how the board shakes out best, and I feel like that's what they should do, depending, if one of the 3 wide receivers is still there. I think quarterback 2 also makes sense. I don't think the talent necessarily makes sense. Again, it totally depends. Let's say a Sewell falls, a Slater falls, then maybe that does make more sense. But I think if you're talking about like defensive line, which I think is possible. You look at maybe like a Kwity Paye, and you think about how Brandon Graham isn't getting any younger, Josh Sweat not under contract for next season, Derek Barnett not under contract for next season, then I totally see it in the realm of possibility. And it's almost just like, I'm not going to believe they're not going to take a lineman until I see it.
Yeah. Well, Brandon's smart, Jody. See, Since
You Eagle
1999.
beat guys all stick
That's
together.
well,
You've
but
been
because
around the organization too
we've
long.
been through it.
Evaluate the
We've been
talent on the
through it.
board and take the
We've been
best
through
player.
it. You have to look at history. What's past is prologue. Those who don't learn from history, doomed to repeat it, Jody. Every time since 1999, 16 or above, offensive lineman, defensive lineman, or quarterback. Now, Brandon's right, but if you start thinking about why do you move down from 6 to 12? Because the talent isn't there. If you can't get a quarterback, you're not taking Kwity Paye at 6. You're not taking you're not getting Penei Sewell, although if he's there, I run to get the card in. So you fall back to where it's more desirable to take that offensive lineman. That's my theory, Brandon. But I would say I do go back to Andy Reid. And what Andy said, I think Joe Banner said in his first interview was, it was give me 2 tackles, offensive tackles, 2 pass rushers, a quarterback, and 2 cornerbacks. So I do think there's an outside chance they could take one of the top 3 corners. That's it. Other than that, it's offensive, defensive line.
I really wonder how much the perception of this team right now, in terms of all the negativity, because the Eagles know that they. I don't know how you couldn't. I mean, you look at basically anything the Eagles tweet from their official Twitter account, and the first 10 responses are going to be "Fire Howie." So I can only imagine they know they're under pressure and coming off a bad season. Not to say that this should govern it in terms of fan perception, or it will, but I almost just wonder, do they know they kind of can't get away with a line pick, and know they need something a little bit more of a splash? So maybe cornerback is that. And I don't think that's the great justification for it, but maybe it's more possible, to Jody's point, because of that factor where they kind of just need to get people back on board.
All right, let me ask this question to both of you guys. Brandon goes first because we are good to our guests here, right, Johnny? If these 2 players, and I'm not even going to name the players, I'm going to name them in sort, in kind, but I won't even give you the exact names. You can actually pick or choose the exact names. If the Eagles have a choice between the second cornerback to come off the board, and you can decide which cornerback comes off first, or the 3rd wide receiver that comes off the board, and you can pick or choose. Well, you can't really take Jamar Chase. He's going to be gone. So Waddle or Smith, or whichever the 2 cornerbacks is left available. I certainly think the Virginia Tech kid is going to fall because of the injured. Caleb is not going to be taken in the first 11 picks. Which way do you think the Eagles will go? If their choice is 3rd best wide receiver, 2nd best quarterback, BLG, which way the Eagles going?
One thing about cornerback that I've been thinking about, and we don't know exactly, for sure, 100%, what scheme Jonathan Gannon is going to run here. We just don't have that level of familiarity, and we haven't heard from him, really. But I almost wonder, is cornerback a position that they're going to need to invest a primary resource in? When you just look at how Gannon has kind of gotten more out of less. I mean, TJ Carey, who's a free agent this offseason, had a career year last year with the Colts. He's kind of been a journeyman. Xavier Rhodes, I thought, looked left for dead when the Vikings cut him, and he had a career resurgence. And Chris Ballard actually specifically cited Jonathan Gannon as a big reason why he was able to turn things around. So I almost wonder if they could do a little bit more with less at corner. And to me, the guy I want, and I think they should want, is Devontae Smith at number 12. Will he make it there? I don't know. But this, to me, is like Justin Jefferson. Not to say they're going to have the same amount of success, but and not that they're the same exact player, but when you're looking at a guy you can bet on to be a good pro, I just think everything about Devontae Smith, weight concerns aside, which aren't a concern to me when you look at how he's been durable, how he's been able to produce an elite level college football, I think he should be the guy, and I think it's a decent bet that he could be the guy.
That's interesting, Brandon. You mentioned last year, obviously, Jalen Reagor at number 21 overall. You go back the year prior, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, and maybe Jeffrey Lurie put the thumb on the scale to take him. But also, you kind of carpet bomb the wide receiver position in 2020 as well with John Hightower and Quez Watkins. At what point do you say there's needs all over, throw the dart at the dartboard, you're going to find a need here? At what point do you say we got to develop the players we have and fill some of these other holes? Can you keep going wide receiver, acknowledging Devontae Smith is a step up from all those guys? But one of the valid criticisms of Doug Peterson's staff, in my opinion, was developing players. Isn't this what the new coaching staff is here for?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely a big selling point or a big sticking point to them is that, like, hey, we need to take this talent we have and develop it. Now, I would say it's kind of hard to, know always what you can kind of get out of this. I don't think it's like the Eagles have drafted these perfect balls of clay and it's just like, well, the coaches couldn't mold them. I think there have been problems with the clay, so to speak, here. I think going to Smith, though, I think that's a guy who, like, you almost can't mess up. And the development there, not unlike Jefferson, is just like, this is a guy who you just feel so good about. And the learning curve is going to be super steep. You plug and play almost to an extent. But obviously, yeah, I mean, Nick Sirianni has a background with wide receivers, and I think that did attract the Eagles. I think that's something they like about him, just like it is cornerbacks for Gannon. Because, again, those two positions, wide receiver and corner, let's face it, like, the Eagles have never really been able to draft and develop at those positions since Howie Roseman became GM.
BLG, last one from me. And we'll put our favorite Philadelphia Eagles aside for a second. 5 quarterbacks going to be drafted in the first round in the NFL draft a couple of weeks from now. How high is high? How many picks is it going to take before the 5th and final? I don't believe Kellen Mond is getting into the first round. Some people are projecting that is a possibility. I don't think so. I think it's 5 and only 5. But how 5 of those 5, how high are they going to come off the board?
I'm going to say, I think 5 in the top 10. I think we're going to see 4 in the first 4. I think Atlanta will trade down, and then maybe it's the Cowboys pick there at 10. Maybe Denver takes one even at 9. So I think you're looking at 9 or 10 for the first 5 quarterbacks.
Last one from me, Brandon, as well, since we went quarterbacks. And by the way, that'll help the Eagles in theory. If those 5 guys go, that'll help the Eagles at 12 overall. But the Eagles have Jalen Hurts, Joe Flacco as a backup. They still need to add another quarterback. They're going to draft one at some point. Where is that going to be? Could it be day 2 or is it going to be day 3? Are we getting another Clayton Thorson, or are we getting a Kyle Trask or Davis Mills, somebody with some potential?
Man, what if they just took one in the second again? What a time! What a time that would be.
Trade down to 53 overall. That would be great.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to say day 3. I think it shouldn't come as a shock in that, Lurie has talked about wanting to get back to drafting a quarterback every year, kind of like, I don't think they always did under Andy Reid, but in theory, that's something they talked about. Yeah. And I definitely think, not being sold on Hurts, that and also having, 11 picks in this year's draft, and that's right now. They could trade around, maybe get even more. I think at that point, you just have the extra ammo. Why not take one if the value is right, especially? I think it'll be day 3 guy.
His website, Bleeding Green Nation, is a must-stop for Eagle fans on a daily basis. We're glad he stopped in with us here on Birds 365 today. BLG, I'll be in touch. Thanks for hopping on with us.
Thanks, guys.
Brandon Lee Gowton here with us on Birds 365. McDonald McMullen with you. We'll come back. We'll give a last couple of thoughts. Another day off the calendar. We're clicking toward the upcoming NFL draft. We'll come back, put a bow on the show with you here on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.